Independence and industrialization also gave rise to a third I, the projection of Western values on the rest of the world in the exercise of what we call imperialism. Imperialism can come from many sources, and so we'll look at some of the economic motives for this, as well as the political and military and social things that drove the new imperialism of the 19th century. There are so many examples of this, we could spend weeks and weeks on it, but we'll look at a couple of them particularly. India, Africa, and Australia, for example. And yes, there are other places that get involved with it as well. The Western world may have been imposing its values on the rest of the world in the era of new imperialism, but the rest of the world then had to determine what to do about that and how to respond to that. We will look at three different models that the world used in responding to Western imperialism. Is it better to capitulate, as Africa did, and largely be run over by the West? Or should one fight back, as China chose to do, much to its dismay during the 19th century? A third alternative approach is evidenced by the way Japan handled imperialism, when they chose to largely adopt Western ideas and use them as their own. When all is said and done, the era from 1750 to 1900 is an era of unprecedented growth, economic growth, growth in knowledge, but also a huge growth in population. If you look at the chart, you will see that with the rise of industrialization in about 1750, population growth soared. Part of this is not so much an increase in the birth rate as a decline in the death rate. People lived longer, and family sizes and birth rates did not change to keep up with that. The era is also marked by another I, immigration. This is an era of massive movement of people. It is perhaps demonstrated in this chart most clearly, where we see Europe, the United States, and Canada accounting for barely 19% of the world's population in 1750. Beginning of this time period. By 1900, at the end of it, those same areas, Europe, the United States, and Canada, accounted for about 30% of the world's population, a huge change in where people were living. Why did that happen? Well, there's a lot of motives involved in this. Some people moved to escape oppression, to escape bad conditions, things of that nature. But other people moved for the opportunity, whether that be economic opportunity or political opportunity and perceived freedom. People also move to fill needs. The growth of industrialization created new jobs, but those jobs were in different places. And it created the need for the building of infrastructure. Think, for example, of the development of those railroads and the number of people that came to the United States to help do that. It also comes from massive growth of industrialization and population, which means the need for more agricultural workers. And at the very time that there's a growing need for agricultural workers, there are no slaves because of emancipation to do the work. And so people move to take that on. This mass movement of people has economic and political impact, to be sure, but it also has cultural impact to consider. In some cases, very positive. Assimilation and cultural diffusion can enrich a nation and make entirely new cultures. But the downside on that might occur for those that are already there, or perhaps even the new members that have moved into an era and now are being threatened by more new members behind them. Those people are often displaced from their land and from their lifestyles, and that can lead to resistance and all sorts of problems within a nation. Or the alternative might be to try to adjust to the migration and imperialism of the Western world, but some nations suffered with serious identity crises in the process of doing that. For example, the Ottoman Empire, which we see pictured here in a famous cartoon from Punch magazine that called them the sick man of Europe. So where does this leave us by the end of the unit? Well, you'll recall that I said this is not just the age of revolution, but the age of Western domination. And indeed, the world is dominated by the West by 1900. That's true in multiple ways. In part, the Western world controls the economy of the world. We can see that in the chart on the left, which measures the gross domestic product, the output of goods and services by a nation. In 1700, Asia clearly dominated the output of the world, but by 1900, it had totally flipped, and Western Europe and North America now accounted for over half of the world's output. But it's also exemplified in that chart on the right, which shows the geographic domination of the Western world. Whereas at the beginning of this era in 1800, the Western world controlled barely 1/3 of the world's surface, by the end of this unit it controlled virtually all of it. Indeed, the Western world dominates the Earth by 1900. But our last unit, the 20th century, will see this all change.